Welcome to this wealth creation series as we explore principles for abundant life. This series forms part of our Christian growth track, which equips you to find and fulfill your life purpose. To get the most out of this session, find a quiet space or use earphones. Kindly register to receive the links for the remainder of this free series by contacting info@cohcc.net or 079 520 2088. Also order your copy of the Power to Create Wealth book and join an on-site or online small group discussion after each session. Help us spread this message via sharing it on Facebook or by making a financial donation.
Wisdom is our capacity to exercise the superior intelligence of God. And Solomon writes and he says, wisdom is the principal thing. In other words, wisdom is the most important thing. There's nothing that's more important than wisdom. And in 2 Chronicles 1 verse 11, it says, God said to Solomon when as a young man he became king of Israel, he said, because you had this in mind and did not ask for riches, wealth, or honor, or the life of those who hate you, nor have you asked for a long life, but you have asked for yourself wisdom and knowledge that you may rule my people over whom I made you king. Wisdom and knowledge have been granted to you. And I will also give you riches and wealth and honor, such as none of the kings who were before you has ever possessed, those who will come after you. And so we've learned now that wisdom is God's superior intelligence. But here Solomon was given the option. He can ask God anything. And instead of asking riches and wealth, he asked for wisdom. And God says, because you've asked wisdom, you'll also get riches and wealth. Because riches and wealth actually follows wisdom. Wisdom is my capacity. Remember last night we said each of us has a capacity to build wealth and steward it. Your capacity might be 30,000 rand a month, which means whatever amount you are given, you'll convert it either up or down to 30,000 rand. But as we gain wisdom, wisdom expands our base of intelligence, either to inferior human wisdom or intelligence or to superior intelligence. And so, do you know that King Solomon was the richest man that ever lived? Not only the wisest, but the richest man. If you take his wealth portfolio as the Bible describes it, then scholars reckon that King Solomon had over $1 trillion in his wealth portfolio. Now, the richest man, Bill Gates, last time I checked, his wealth portfolio was around about 85 billion. It might be a little bit more now. Oh, yes, now. Okay. But at the writing of this book, it was Bill Gates, and at that time, King Solomon would have been 30 times richer than Bill Gates. In fact, King Solomon was richer than the 20 richest individuals 3-4 years ago in the world. Now, I think if the richest man that ever lived, apart from Noah, we learned this morning that Noah was actually richer than Solomon because he owned the whole world when he came out of the flood. But that was just a transfer. It wasn't built. Okay, like King Solomon built this wealth. And if King Solomon offers us wisdom, I think we can learn a lot. If Jeff Bezos or Bill Gates comes in here and he wants to offer us some tips and some tricks and principles on creating wealth, who of you will attend his seminar? Yet King Solomon's seminar is freely available in Scripture. He was the richest man that ever lived. And we don't even read it. Come on. True or not? He says in Proverbs 4 verse 7, wisdom is the principal thing, and therefore get wisdom. He urges us to seek wisdom more than treasures and silver, because he says riches and wealth follows wisdom. Now, how do we get wisdom? I think we learned it in one of the previous sessions. The beginning of wisdom is the fear of God. What is the fear of God? The fear of God is reverence and worshipful awe and respect for God. But for me in this context, the fear of God really is this, is the acknowledgement to say, God, you know better. You know better. Your opinion is superior to my opinion. Your intelligence is superior to human. And therefore, I'm not going to follow my own way. I'm not going to do it the human way, but I'm coming to you in acknowledgement that your wisdom and your intelligence is superior, and I submit myself. That's why it's so easy to submit to the sound of God's voice and the sound of God's word. Why? Because His wisdom is superior. His intelligence is really superior. The same King Solomon, the wisest and the richest man that ever lived, explained in Proverbs 8 verse 18. He says, with me, which is wisdom, are riches and honor. And note that word, enduring wealth. So with wisdom there is riches and enduring wealth and prosperity. My fruit is better than gold, even pure gold, and my yield better than the choicest of silver. So if we want the wisdom to build wealth like King Solomon, we need to do a few things, a few keys that we learn from the wisest and richest man that ever lived. The first thing is we need to shift to the wealth quadrant. We need to shift to the wealth quadrant. And if I can maybe just explain it by the means of drawing a matrix. So there's 4 blocks, and the first block is in. That means money comes in. The second block is out. That means money goes out. Okay? The A stands for assets. Okay? And we define an asset in this context as an asset in which you invest money that gives a return on investment. In other words, that pays you back. In other words, the house that you live in that doesn't make you any money is not a real asset. One day it can become an asset, but today it's only costing you money. It's not an asset. Actually, today the house you're living in is a liability. Some of you, when you read the word liability, you see visions and pictures of your mother-in-law. But she's not a liability, she might be. But anything that costs you money is a liability. Okay? In, out, asset, liability. So we need to shift to the wealth quadrant. Many people seem rich, but they have no wealth. The word riches, Solomon says wisdom gives riches. Riches refers to buying power, or to something that you see with the eye. So riches give you the ability to buy that car that makes you look rich, or to buy the boat or the jet ski or the fancy bike or you name it, the fancy house. You look rich, the fancy clothes, you are perceived to be rich. But I found many people who are very rich. They've got all the expensive holidays and the expensive things, but they have accumulated very little wealth. In fact, if they lose their business or the income drop, or if they lose their salary, within months they will lose all of that. Riches. Things their eyes can see, that's riches. And we must understand that we live in one of these 4 quadrants. So, how does the poorest of the poor people live? They live, everything that comes in goes out. And we call these quadrants the consumer quadrant. So the poorest of the poor lives in the consumer quadrant. Whatever comes in goes out. I live day to day, month to month, hand to mouth. I work today, I earn today, I eat today. The poorest of the poor live like that. Normally they have very little debt themselves, but they have to work today to eat today. How does the middle class live? Money comes in. They get a little bit more money than the poor. So against the money against their paycheck, they are now in a fortunate position, to be able to borrow money. So they borrow money to finance their lifestyle. They buy liabilities. They buy a TV on credit, clothes on credit, a holiday on credit. And then long after the effect of that holiday is worn off, they're still paying off on the holiday. Long after the pair of jeans is no longer in fashion, they're still paying off on. And so money comes in, and with that money they buy a liability, and they become slaves of the system. So the poorest of the poor lives in the consumer quadrant. The middle class lives in the liability quadrant. Where do the Jews live and the richest of the rich in the world? They live in what I call the wealth. It's right assets, but they live in the wealth quadrant. Where the first priority with any money that comes in is to say, how will I invest this into wealth? Remember, what's the definition of wealth assets? It is assets that will grow value over time, but that also gives me a monthly or quarterly return on investment. In other words, it gives income. It gives me money on the table. So here's how the wealthy live. Any money that comes in, the first question they ask is, how will I invest this money into a wealth asset that will give me income? And with that income that comes back to me, I finance my expenses. You want to drive a sports car? That's great. Don't save up for a sports car. Invest in an asset that will give you a return on investment so that this asset will finance your sports car. Because otherwise, if you buy a sports car on credit, you become the slave of that car. See, God doesn't have a problem with you and I driving a nice car. But if we do it like this, if we live in the liability quadrant, it's not you driving the car, it's the car driving you. I think God wants His children to live in mansions, in good houses. Because we need to get used to live in a mansion, because there's many mansions in heaven. He's preparing a mansion in heaven. And can you imagine how out of place you will feel when you get to heaven and there's this massive mansion and jy's gewoond om in so klein hokkie te bly? Come on, earth is training for heaven. On earth we learn to rule and reign so that we can one day rule and reign the universe with our God and our Father. So God wants us to own massive houses. But if that house becomes my liability, then I'm not owning the house is owning me. He said, I become the slave of that bond payment every month. So that's how the Lord led us, by trial and error. And sometimes we suffered the trials of our errors, Katinka and I. But eventually we got there where we invested into a house that not only paid its own bond, but it give us enough income back so that same house pays for itself. Then it pays for our 2 cars and it pays for the house we're living in now. So I'm not the slave of either of these 2 bonds. This house has become the slave. And I became the master. You see, when we sup, and we're going to get to that just now, when Jesus becomes our master and He gives us His superior intelligence, He gives us a way to beat the system so that we can become masters over money. So we no longer have to be slaves. Does that make sense? And King Solomon says you have to shift your focus. Wisdom shifts us to live in the wealth quadrant. That's why the Jews prosper. That's why the richest of the rich just grow richer every year. Okay, number 2. Solomon is teaching us to build enduring wealth. Remember that word we read, enduring wealth. Now this is a fascinating word. The word enduring in the Hebrew language means surpassing sufficiency. We'll get to that just now. It means advanced abundance and imminent enoughness. But it also means this, to buy something of high value at low cost. To buy something at a high value at low cost. Now, this is the fundamental principle of wealth creation. And King Solomon knew this, and I don't know how many thousand years ago he lived, maybe 4,000 or 6,000 years. But King Solomon grabbed onto this principle that if you want to build enduring wealth means to buy high value at low cost. It's as simple as that. When Katinga and I moved into Joburg, we looked at what the nice areas were, and we realized that the cheapest house in the nice areas sold for over 2 million rand. But at the time, we could only afford to get a bond for 1 million rand. So I prayed. Katinka and I agreed. We said, Lord, trust that you will give us a 2 million rand house for 1 million rand. And God said to me, yes, I will do it for you. But you have to start investigating the option of auctions. So for a whole year, I attended auctions. And I bought in my mind 10 houses on those auctions. But I lost them. They didn't come through. But it was a year of training. We got trained in how these things work. And after 1 year, we bought a house, of which the outstanding bank balance or bond was 2.2 million rand. But we purchased it for 1.1 million rand. Okay? What is the definition of enduring wealth? Buying a high value asset at low cost. I have to explain the principle with this of what we call equity. Maybe you've heard of the term equity. Let me explain it, because wealth is created when you understand equity. What was the value of the house that we bought? 2.2 million rand. Okay. What was the bond that we had to take out? 1.1. So I financed the full purchase sum, 1.1 million rand. So how much of the house did I own? Belonged to me? Half of it, is it right? The other half belonged to the bank. Okay, is that true? So equity is the portion of the asset that belongs to you. And equity is wealth. So you want to buy a high value asset at low cost, which gives you a lot of equity. Here's what happened. In the 5 minutes that auction lasted, I bought 1.1 million rands worth of equity in 5 minutes. I made 1.1 million rand in 5. It took me a year to learn how to do it. But in 5 minutes, I made 1.1 million rands like that. When the hammer fell on me, I had 1.1 million rand in my pocket. That's the power of equity. That's the power of enduring wealth, buying a high value asset at low cost. One of the ways in which we can increase our equity is to pay a larger deposit onto the house. Many of us have done that. Okay, so in other words, we own a bigger portion of the house, and the bank owes less. Number 2 is increase your monthly installments. In the book, there's a whole graph that shows you if you pay 500 rand a month extra over 20 years, you'll pay your house off in 8 years less than 20 years. And you'll save millions of rands. Okay? Number 3, how do we gain equity? Save against your bond. So instead of having money, saving it in another account, you save it against your bond, because we're living in a different time now, but generally our interest rate on bonds are about 10%. So if you save money at Absa in a savings account, what are you going to get? If you're lucky, you're going to get 6%. Okay? So if you put 100,000 rand in the bank at Absa for a year, after a year they're going to give you 6,000 rand back. But if you save that same 100,000 rand against your bond, in other words, you put it in your bond account, you need to have a flexi bond account to do that, then Absa will give you 10,000 rand off instead of 6,000 rand. So it's better to save against your bond. That's one way to increase equity. Number 4 is you can increase your equity by adding value to your property. I love this. I will probably never buy in a complex again unless I can buy the whole complex, because it's very difficult in a townhouse complex or shared title complex to increase value on your property. But I learned this. I stumbled upon this. The one day I needed to extend and carport at my property. So there was already a cement slab thrown, and so what I did is I bought second-hand steel, and my welder welded together, and he built a carport, and it cost me 4,000 rand. I only paid for the IBR sheets new. It was 4,000 rand. So I had this 40 square meters carport. And a couple of weeks later, the bank evaluator came because I wanted to refinance the house. And because of that carport, which was 40 squares, I think he added something like 300,000 rand to the worth of my property. So I spent 4,000 rand, and I increased the value of my property by 300,000 rand. Add value to your property. And if you can build it cheaper, still with good materials, but you build it yourself, if you can develop the skills to self-renovate, sorry, Uncle Albie, but if you can develop that skills to self-renovate, then you can increase more. Number 5, how do you gain equity? Is purchase a high-value property at low cost, and that's what I've explained just now. Okay. Why am I so excited about property? Because, let me use this illustration. If you and I as a salary earner, for instance, if you want to buy 100,000 rands, if you want to buy 1 million rands worth of stocks, how much of that 1 million rand do you need to come up yourself? You need to use your own money. R1,000,000. Absa is not going to borrow you 900,000 rand to buy stocks. If you want to buy gold, how much of your own money do you need to come up with? Yes. If you want to buy cattle, how much money do you need to come up with? R1,000,000. Property is probably the only asset class that's got enough security where you can go to the bank and say, listen, I've got 100,000 rand. How about you borrowing me 900,000 rand so I can buy R1,000,000 rand asset? Is that all right? Now, let's draw this equity cylinder again here. So we've got let's do it like this. Can you see this? Let me use another one. Let's say we've got R1,000,000 rand. The property is worth 1,000,000 rand. And how much of the property belongs to me on a 10% deposit? So it's 100,000 there. The bank owns 90,000. Okay. If not 900,000, yes. If the property value, which in a healthy market grows at about 10% per year, and we'll get back to that. For the last few years, there's actually been a negative growth on property, but that's okay. It will self-correct. It's actually a great time to buy property now. Okay. But if in a normal market, this property then grows by 10% per annum, how much have my investment grown over a year? No. So the property was worth R1,000,000, and a year later the property is worth how much? 1.1 million. It means how much equity have I now after a year? 200,000. So 100 becomes 200,000, which means my 100,000 rand investment grew by how much? 100%. Now, if you invest in a stock market that tells you we guarantee you 100% growth over a year, don't invest in them because they're crooks. You see, property is the only wealth asset where you can borrow the bank's money to make money. Okay, now what happens? What happens if instead of buying R1,000,000 rands worth of property, we buy a property worth 2.2 million rand, or say, let's use a round figure, just 2 million rand, but we buy it at 1 million rand. We buy it at 50%, a high value asset at low cost. What's going to happen now? It means I put down 100,000 rand of my own money, and the bank still gives 900,000 rand. But the 2 million rand now grows to 2.2. So how much is my 100,000 rand worth after a year? Worth 300,000. But we're forgetting something. The moment the hammer fell on me, how much equity did I buy? 1 million. So not only did I make 300,000 or 200,000 rand in growth, I also made 1 million rand when I purchased it. So it's 1.3 million rand. So my 100,000 rands in 1 year grew by 1,300% increase. Now give me a stock option, a Bitcoin, give me a cryptocurrency, give me a forex trader that can guarantee you get this kind of growth and have an asset which you can insure with a bank or an insurance company that if it burns down, it will pay out the full sum. That's why I get excited about property. Now there is pitfalls when it comes to property, so don't just rush into property. You might make your money when you buy property, not when you sell it. Always make your money, so you buy at the right price, you buy in the right area. And remember the 3 rules of property. Location, location, location. And the location isn't the township, it's the area in which the property is, okay? Now, this definition of enduring wealth is not just buying a high asset at low cost. There's also 3 other words that we looked at. And in fact, the book, there's 5 other words in which that explains the Hebrew word, but I want to look at 3. One of them is that we need to generate income. It needs to produce revenue. The second one is it means surpassing sufficiency and advance abundance. Let's quickly look at that. Enduring wealth produces revenue, in other words, income. Now let's say I've bought this house. I'm not going to stay in it. I've bought it as an investment. I want to put tenants in it. Now, if we buy a R1,000,000 house in a healthy rental market, you should be able to rent out a R1,000,000 house for about 10,000 Rand a month, 1% of the purchase price. So you should be able to at least put tenants in and rent it out and cover your bond payment. But what happens if you buy a 2,000,000 Rand house for 1,000,000 Rand? How much would you be able to rent it out for? 20,000. So you see, it's already profit. So when you buy enduring wealth, a high asset value at a low cost, it produces revenue. Number two, enduring wealth offers surpassing efficiency. What is surpassing efficiency? It means that you will beat inflation. Enduring wealth beats inflation. Inflation ranges between 7 and 10%, or 6 and 10% per year. But food inflation goes as much as 30% a year. That's why the poorer grows poorer every day or every year. Now, here's what happens is rental income goes up between 5 and 10% per year. So if I rent out this property, my rent that I get in will stay afloat with inflation. It will keep track of inflation. Every year the tenant needs to pay a little bit more to rent the same house. But if I have bought enduring wealth, if I, in other words, bought a 2,000,000 Rand house at 1,000,000 Rand, guess what happens? I've already beaten inflation for the next 10 years, even if the value of my property doesn't increase by a cent. And that's the power of enduring wealth. Solomon was amazing. God is amazing. His wisdom is so far superior to human wisdom. You can buy a property that for the next 10 years, even if the property or the rent doesn't increase by a cent, it will still beat inflation for 10 years. You see, the word there is advance abundance. For the next 10 years, I've beaten inflation, plus my rent goes up, plus the value of the property increases. Many people struggle to make preparation for their old age, for retirement, right? Now, if you can have a house like this, where you bought it for 1,000,000, it's giving you 20,000 Rand a month, the tenant pays off your bond payments and cover the expenses. In 20 years' time, or maybe if you paid off quicker, it will be bond free. Then you get the full 20,000. But you're not getting 20,000 Rand, you're getting the equivalent of 20,000 Rand, the buying power of 20,000 Rand today, but it must increase over time, isn't it? As your rent goes up. So by the time you retire in 20 years, you're not getting 25,000, maybe you're getting 60 or 70,000 Rand a month because rent has gone up. So here's how you do a retirement plan with property. How much do you need today? Just throw out a number, 40,000. Okay? Let's say 40,000, like a ronde getal. So if you need 40,000 now to survive, it means you need 40,000 plus, say, 10% per year. Then you can retire. Is that correct? So what you do is you buy 2 of these houses. That gives you 20,000 Rand a month now, because their rent will increase over time. And by the time they pay it off, they'll give you the equivalent of 40,000 Rand today, but in the future, a bit more money. That's how you build a retirement plan with properties. If you need 80,000 Rand, I don't know what your spending habits are, what's the lifestyle, then you buy 4 of these. You know, the bank will borrow you money for that. You don't even need a lot of your own money. You leverage the bank's money to make more money and buy a high value asset at low cost. In Proverbs 24 verse 27, same Solomon writes this. He says, prepare your work outside and make it ready for yourself in the field. Afterwards, build your house. You see, we all want to build our house first. We want to live in a beautiful house, and we just want to, but then we become the slave of that house. You see, when Katinka and I learned this principle, we said, no. The house we bought in Joburg wasn't for us. And we started giving up a little bit of our house, and we built flats, and our house grew smaller. We were living in a mansion. We were getting used to it, but it was killing us because we became slaves to this man. We were renovating parts of it. We turned into flats and renting out. And eventually we lived in a little 3-bedroom townhouse part of our house. That was our field that we prepared. So that field now pays for the house we just bought. There's so much wisdom in the Word of God. Isn't that amazing? How to beat the system. how not to be a slave to the system. Same Solomon wrote in Proverbs 14:4. He says, this is a good one. He says, where there's no oxen, the manger is clean, but much revenue or income comes by the strength of the ox. What is he saying? He says, if there's no oxen in the stall, there's no poo in the stall. That's what he's saying. He says, the stall is clean. As daar geen os is nie, is daar geen poo in die stal nie. Why? Because to make money, to create income, sometimes it requires, or most of the time, it requires digging away some poo. It requires work. And most people don't create wealth or generate income because money-making opportunities look like work. They are dressed in overalls and they look like work. You want to create a business? Then find a problem that other people don't want to fix themselves and are willing to pay you for fixing. That's what an electrician does. He's willing and he's got the knowledge to fix certain problems that I don't want to touch because I'm scared I'm going to fry myself. So I'll pay him. But much revenue comes when we're willing to fix other people's problems. Solomon is teaching us not only to work hard, but also to work smart with our money. I remember my dad really taught us to work hard for our money and work smart with our money. Taught us from a young age to budget and manage our own affairs. One thing I had to learn many years later was also how to let money work for me, how to use the bank's 900,000 rand. To with the bank's 900,000 rand, buy R1 million of equity and see 1,300% growth on my investment. You see, as a pastor, how long will it take me to save up R1 million? I probably will never be able to save R1 million, but in 5 minutes, on a pastor's salary, I made R1 million. And this is not my wisdom, it's the superior intelligence of our Father. Ecclesiastes 10 verse 19, Solomon writes, he says, a feast is made for laughter and wine makes merry, but money answers everything. Money answers everything. Do you know that money has a solution for every problem? I find that money's solution to most problems are the worst possible solution you can give. You see, if we have a lot of money, what do we do when we have problems? We take that money and we throw the money towards the problem and try and make it go away. If you travel too fast and the speed cop jumps out behind the bush and he catches you, what does some of the speed cops want you to do? To pay a bribe. What is that? I'm taking money and I'm throwing money at the problem. But I'm actually creating a bigger problem. Because now, I've got a legal problem and I've got a moral problem. Parents who don't spend enough time with their own children but are wealthy, what do? They take money and gifts and they throw it at their children to try and make up for love. But they create bigger problems. Money will answer every problem, but money gives an inferior solution to every problem. I find that the greatest things that Katinka and I have ever done in our lives, the greatest things we've achieved in ministry and in life, was when we didn't have the money, but we tapped into the superior intelligence and wisdom of God, and we found creative solutions and creative answers to these problems and things that money can't buy. Most of the things I taught you now was learned through the school of hard knocks and being in desperation, turning to God and saying, God, there must be a better way. I can't do it. I don't have the money to do it. And God says, you don't need money, you need my wisdom. Solomon says, don't look for riches and treasures, seek wisdom. Because wisdom is the key to wealth. Money has an answer to everything. But the best ideas often comes not with money, but with creativity. Some of the most forward-thinking corporate organizations, when they want to really expand their brand and they really want to be innovative, do you know what they do to their teams? They cut the budget of their teams by half. That's what they do. If they want their teams to think out of the box and get creative solutions, they cut their budget into half because money is the most superficial solution to problems. Yes, money answereth all things, but it's never the best solution. Most of the time not. It's the easier solution, but not the best. You want to own this. So if you have a property, then number one will be for you. Calculate the equity you have on your property or properties. Great exercise. So what is the realistic worth or the selling price? If you were to sell your house or your property right now, or if you have cows, how much can you sell it for? Minus what you owe the bank or what you owe whoever else for that property, deduct all of that, and that will be equal to your property's value or the equity owned. Number two, how does cash flow in your life and your family work? Let me just go back to this picture here. How does the cash flow, everything that comes in, does it go out? Because then you're living in the consumer quadrant. Or do you live in the liability quadrant where you borrow against your income and then you use credit to finance your lifestyle? Or do you live here? Now, honestly, Katinka and I still have liabilities and we've got credit, but I must say about half of our income comes from here. So it's a work in progress. We don't arrive here. Remember, we build wealth over time. Half of our income comes from here. So we're building towards that. And if we can do it on a pastor's salary, how much more can many other people do? And then number three, in which quadrant do you currently operate mostly?
Remember to register for this series, order the handbook, and join a small group by contacting info@cohcc.net or 079 520 2088. Help us spread this message via sharing it on Facebook or by making a financial donation with the reference wealth.